Okay, we'll be starting then. Good evening, everyone. My name is Yuliya Musakovska, and tonight I'm here with Artur Dron, Ukrainian writer and serviceman, presenting his book of poetry called We Were Here. This book was published last year in London by Yantar Publishing and is a full-length translation of the original Ukrainian book that was released in 2023 by the Old Lion Publishing here in Lviv. The British edition was supported by the Translate Ukraine program of the Ukrainian Book Institute. And I should say that this is probably the first full translation of a book by a Ukrainian soldier poet speaking of the frontline experience in Russia's war against Ukraine. I had an honor and a pleasure to translate Artur's book into English, working together with a wonderful team of editors from the UK, and they are joining us together with the publisher via Zoom today. We also have an audience in Zoom, which should be quite many people. So welcome everyone, and I hope you can hear and see us well. In fact, and now I'm addressing the audience here in Lviv, there is a physical event in Exeter this evening, and we are bridging these two rooms together in this hybrid conversation. It is also very symbolic, as this book project stems from the collaboration between Exeter and Lviv as UNESCO cities of literature. And please stay tuned for that story. And now please allow me to introduce a British team behind this book. And some of the people are in the room in Exeter, and some are joining us in the audience via Zoom. So professors of the University of Exeter, Hugh Roberts, is with us. Hi, Hugh.
Hey.
Helen Vassallo, I think Helen is in the audience. Hello, Helen. Poets Fiona Benson. Fiona, hello. And Charlotte Shevchenko Knight, who I think is in Manchester. And also founder of Yantar Publishing, Michael Tate, in London. So welcome. And to kick off this presentation, I'd like to ask Artur to start with a poem.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I will tell you something about this book, but we decided to start from one of the most important poem of this poetry collection, and I will read it to you in Ukrainian and then in Yulia's translation. So in Ukrainian it sounds: коли ми скидаємо бронежилети, шоломи, бушлати, куртки, рукавиці, і їмо мандарини біля буржуйки, і робимо схожими на дітей, я інколи думаю, що ти десь в сусідній кімнаті. В селі якась жінка з місцевих сказала дитині: синочку, але кожен із нас озирнувся. And now this poem in Yulia's translation. When we take off our bulletproof vests, helmets, coats, jackets and gloves, and sit down to eat tangerines by the stove, we are children again. And sometimes I think you're in the next room. In the village, a local woman called out to her child, my son. And every one of us turned around. Thank you, Hugh. Дякую. Now I would like to tell you something about this book. Before the full-scale invasion, I was working as event manager on the Outline Publishing House, and I used to ask writers what readers have to know about your books before they will read it. And today in the morning, I asked this question myself about this book. And I think it's one of the best ways to explain something important about the book. So I will tell you a few things you have to know. First of all, of course, is that this book is written on a war, on a battle areas of Russian-Ukrainian war. I was writing these poems in 2022, 2023, mostly in Donetsk region. It's one of the most important, the hardest parts of our front line. But already second thing is that this book is not about the war. I like to say and to repeat it many times that it is written on the war, but not about the war. It's about some more important things about Ukrainians, about us, about how we love each other in these terrible times, how we live in these times, how we trying to protect ourselves, how we are bearing each other, how we love each other. So it's about more important thing than just a war. And third thing is that it's not just a book. It's some kind of whole charity project because the Outline Publishing House donate all profits from this book to charity fund Голоси дітей. And not just profits from book sellings, but also, for example, my honorars for a translation. So every foreign edition, including English edition, has also this charity part, what is very important for me. It's my way to help children affected by the war, to help them to get help they need. For example, to have possibility to get sessions with professional psychologists or any other therapists they need. So I think it's really the most important thing about this book, but it's about the book in general. Here is how looks Ukrainian edition. And about English edition, our main topic today, you will hear more from Yulia, from this wonderful editor team. So I would like to ask Yulia to continue.
Okay, thank you. And I will probably start and tell you the story I promised to tell you in the beginning, how this book actually happened and how everything started. So it started when I was invited to participate in the conference of UNESCO Cities of Literature, together with my fellow poet and radio host, Olena Husseinova. And also Anna Khryakova, who is a cultural manager at Lviv UNESCO City of Literature. And we were traveling to Exeter, actually with heavy hearts, on the evening following a funeral of our friend and fellow writer, Victoria Melina, who died from injuries inflicted by a Russian missile in Kramatorsk. And furthermore, on the night of our trip, Russian missiles struck Lviv, our city, and resulted in fatalities, injuries, and a lot of destruction in the residential area. And at that time, Anna and I were on the bus to Warsaw, and we learned this horrible news. So it was a heavy start and a long trip, like most of these advocacy trips nowadays. But then in Exeter, we were very warmly welcomed and met with this genuine hospitality and openness to our wartime experiences. So Olena and I, alongside our own work, brought stories and poems of other Ukrainian writers, and among them, of course, Victoria Melina, and also Alexander Osadko, a fallen soldier and a husband of my close friend and poet Hanna Osadko. We also read poems by Ukrainian defenders, thanks to whom such advocacy trips and everything else, like us breathing, being able to breathe in this time of war, is now possible. And it was our responsibility to amplify the voices of our soldiers. Well, it still is, because these voices are not heard on international platform often enough. And the Exeter team graciously helped translate their work in advance, and among them were 5 poems by Artur Dron, who, with his poetry, left a lasting impression in Exeter. And at that time, Artur's collection hadn't been published yet, but his frontline poetry was making its way to people in Ukraine and abroad. Thanks to the efforts of various translators, English and Polish and Italian and Lithuanian, and I think even more. Artur has joined the army shortly after the full-scale invasion began, and his poems, as he said, written on the battlefield, which he posted on social media, made this huge impact on Ukrainian readers. So these are the documented experiences of a soldier who is a part of the army, holding off a huge evil force that is threatening global democracy and the rules-based order, and holding it off from further advancement into Europe, first of all. So protecting Ukraine and the entire Europe as a human shield, and going through the unprecedented trials, losing comrades, and witnessing this aftermath of Russian occupation on the liberated territories. So when the opportunity showed itself to have Artur's book translated and published in English, I felt it was of critical importance for such a poetic voice of a soldier to get across to the readers abroad, and also as soon as possible. And of course, this wouldn't have happened without this amazing effort by Hugh Roberts and entire effort of the editorial team. I want to thank you all, and also Mike Tate from Yantar for believing in this book, and also to the Ukrainian Book Institute for supporting its English edition through their Translate Ukraine grant. So thank you, and I really want to hear from our amazing editors in Exeter, so I will pass the word to them, please.
Thank you, Yuliya. Thank you so much for your very kind words. But as Fiona said recently, please don't thank us, because all the credit goes to Artur as the poet, and you as translator, and above all, as the people who are holding the line, as you just said, for the rest of us. I saw a post from Cultural Forces of the Ukrainian Army today, making exactly this point. The fact that we can have poetry readings at all is because of defenders like Artur Dron. So thank you to you, and it's just been a huge privilege for me to get to know you, to get to meet Artur through his poetry and now through Zoom, and I very much hope we get to meet in person in the victorious Ukraine in the near future. Meeting you, Elena Hasenova and Anna Kiryukha in July 2023 was for me a life-changing experience. It was part of a meeting organised by my department at the university, Languages, Cultures and Visual Studies, and Exeter City of Literature. I'm pleased to say that Liv of Exeter City of Literature is in the audience in Exeter today. So it's really thanks to this, the UNESCO Cities of Literature Network that we have this project at all. Poetry that you shared, including Artur Dron's poetry, struck me immediately as work of the very greatest importance, which I don't hesitate to place among the greatest examples of war poetry that many of us can already think of. Obviously, in the UK, we think of First World War poets, and there are all too many similarities, even in the circumstances of the war in trenches, that come through in Ukrainian wartime poetry. One thing I learned in July 2023 was that this existential struggle of Ukraine against Russian imperialism has been going on for centuries. And the Russian Empire has been seeking to erase Ukrainian language, culture, and identity for a very long time. Just one example of a poet, a great poet who is a very important figure, we'll hear him mentioned later, is Vassallo, who died in the Gulag, for example. Also, some of you may know, since you're in Lviv, some of you may know that the term genocide comes from a lawyer who studied in Lviv, Raphael Lemkin. He invented the term. From that same university at the same time, Hersch Lauterpacht worked also on the Nuremberg trials, also studied at the University of Lviv, now known as the Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Lviv is, as it were, at the center of these ideas emerging that are so important and all too important in today's world. One of the ways in which we've shared Artur Dron's poetry very powerfully is with the Devon Ukrainian Association. I'm very pleased to say that there are several members and indeed leads of the Devon Ukrainian Association in the audience at Exeter. And I'm very glad that they're here to share this work too. I'd like to pay particular tribute to my colleague, Helen Vassallo. Unfortunately, she can't join in person because of other commitments. But it's really thanks to Helen that we made the connection with Yanta Publishing. And very unusually, when Helen contacted Michael Tate of Yanta Publishing, he accepted we were here within minutes, which I think is unheard of for a poetry collection, and especially poetry in translation. But that shows again the importance of this work. Also in July 2023, one of the people in the audience was the great poet Fiona Benson. Fiona Benson, who's done wonderful work with the Devon Ukrainian Association, creating very moving creative writing workshops with the community. And I'll pass on to Fiona now to say a few words.
Hi, everybody. Remembering that reading when you came, Yuliya, and I attended with John, and I remember being very frightened because it felt like my people, like the poets, were being hurt. You just come from the funeral of Victoria Amelina, and it was a very strange time for you, and I think we really felt that in that room. We felt that our people were being hurt, I think. I've been asked to speak a little bit about the importance of this book. So it is a staggering collection of poems. First of all, its importance lies in its incredible act of witness. So it resists the dehumanization of statistics and gives human face to the damage in Ukraine, where newspaper stories might suppress the individuality of the people involved. The elegies, the beautiful elegies in this collection, liberate the dead and insist they were here and that their lives were precious. And these poems demand that we look at the human cost of war. These are not just the kind of brief accounts that you find in the news or no-go areas in the map. These poems bring home the facts of war, the facts of trench warfare, and the barbarism that human beings should long have eschewed. This book is written in a determinedly accessible vernacular. It's a book that can be understood by anyone able to read it, and it speaks in many voices. It speaks with the plurality of suffering: soldiers, civilians, grandmothers, mothers, children, even the city speaks. Artur writes in his introduction, what is the point of writing poems when children are being dug out of the rubble? And he answers it to be less lonely. It's one of the amazing things about this book that Dron's poems register small acts of mercy and kindness to the children's drawings that the soldiers carry, the Snickers bars, which you'll hear about in Kiryukha, which come in the care packages and which the soldiers gift on to a child that's left on the front line. It registers prayers of protection and recognizes that underneath the uniform, the soldiers themselves are just kids, and Artur himself is barely out of childhood. So these small pieces of light console as well as devastate. And I'm very grateful that Artur had the great soul to be able to achieve that. So I'm very grateful this collection is in the world. I think everybody should be reading it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. And we will probably continue with the reading. We will start with the Ukrainian, and then I'll continue with English.
Література нікого не вб'є. Віршем не захистишся від кулі. Книжки не врятують від мінометів. Письмо не знайде зниклих безвісти. Тож сенсу в цьому тепер небагато. Але в нас зараз вітри і спека. До бліндажа долітає трупний сморід із яру. Ми користувалися освіжувачем повітря, але третього дня він скінчився. Я читав тоді вибране з туса і після кожного вірша нюхав книжку.
Literature won't kill anybody. A poem won't shield you from a bullet. Books won't save us from mortars. Writing won't find the missing. So there's not much point to it now. But we had droughts and heat here, and the stench of corpses from the ravine was reaching the dugout. We tried using an air freshener, but on the third day it ran out. So I read the selected poems of Stus and smelled the book after every poem.
Вулиця Партизанська. Вулиця Партизанська. Перший. А Кирюха – це ж наш син полка. Це ж єдине дитя на всю вулицю. Він русських уже не застав, його дідушка ще встиг вивезти. Його ніхто не трогав, головне, що його ніхто не трогав. А в ПГТ у нас діток багато, і дитяча площадка тут є. Ми самі зробили. Там качельки в нас, карусельки. Я їм навіть сказала. Так набрались наглості і сказала їм: ви ж, кажу, головне, не трогайте нашу площадку. А потім, помню, отак стоїмо, а вони танком їдуть. І так один голову висунув і сміється. І в нашу площадку в'їжджає. 2. Зайшов до мене ночі один. Бурятик такий противний. А мене така злость взяла, така женська сила українська, знаєте, що я його тапком погнала. Він з автоматом, а я його тапком. А тоді ще отак його взяла і підсрачника дала. Потім уже страх був, потім я боялась. Але в той міг мене така злость взяла, така женська сила. Знаєте, хлопці, я перший раз за ці 8 місяців так красиво їм вілкою. І я себе чувствую білосніжкою. 3. Всяке було, але ми жили надіждою. Ми довго ждали. Чого вони пруть? Чого все це роблять? Невже не розуміють, що не буде так, як вони собі хочуть? Ми не дамо. Нас тут з вулиці багато осталось. Дехто поїхав, але багато осталось. Ми ж вулиця партизанська. Ми, хлопці, живемо надіждою.
So we'll ask you to read the translation, please.
Partisan Street, 1. Ah, Kiryukha. He's our regiment's adopted child, the only one left in the entire street. He wasn't here when the Russians came. His granddad got him out in the nick of time. There's not a scratch on him. Main thing is, there's not a scratch on him. In our town, there are plenty of kids, and we got a playground. We made it ourselves. Swings, roundabouts, the lot. I even told him, with all my nerve, I told him, just don't touch this one thing. Don't touch our playground. And as I recall, we're all standing there and they're driving their tank. And one of them sticks his head out of it, laughing, and drives right over our playground. 2. One night he came by, a Buryak, such a scumbag. And I was so full of rage, so full of Ukrainian woman rage, that I saw him off with a slipper. In with his machine gun, me with my slipper. And then I kicked him in the butt, for good measure. Later, the fear hit me. I got scared. But in that moment, I was so full of rage, proper woman rage. You know, boys, it's the first time in 8 months I've eaten so nicely with a fork. I feel like Snow White. 3. Many things happened, but we lived on hope. We'd waited so long. Why do they keep pushing in? Why do they do it? Don't they understand they won't get their way? We won't let them. Many of us on the street stayed. Some left, but many stayed. We live on Partisan Street, don't you know? We, dear boys, live on hope.
Thank you. And let's continue our talk about this book and maybe go a little bit into the translation process without overwhelming you with details, but generally there's quite a lot to tell. And I'll start by saying that Artur's poetry speaks this universal language of key human values. And it demonstrates both human vulnerability and strength. And of course, it attests to the heroism of Ukrainians. But heroism is ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So this book holds relevance, inspiration, and hope on a global scale, especially in dark times like these. And I've been actively recommending Ukrainian soldier poets and Artur's poetry in particular to translators of my own work in different countries. And one of them, Mikhail Nudal. And that's how I landed as an editor of the Swedish edition of this book that Mikhail translated. And I hope he's here in Zoom with us in the audience. So this collection in Swedish, Viva här, was even published a few weeks earlier than the original Ukrainian book. And I need to mention that with this work, Mikhail Nudal was shortlisted for the Drahamon Prize last year, which is absolutely well-deserved. For me, this experience meant that I was very familiar with these poems, and having used English as my working language for over 2 decades, I could almost hear this poetry in my head in English translation. But the main challenge was me not being a native speaker. But then our colleagues from Exeter reassured me that a strong team of editors will be involved. And it was true. My drafts received a very thorough attention, both from the side of the professional translation experts like Helen, Vassallo, and also from fellow poets like Fiona and Charlotte. And the goal was not just to accurately convey the meaning, but also for the text to actually sound like poetry, while preserving Artur's unique voice and style. And I should say that the input I received from Fiona and Charlotte and Hugh and Helen was invaluable, and I really enjoyed the entire process. And also one thing to mention, that the time frame for finalizing this translation was quite pressing. It was less than 6 months. And I didn't count how many Zoom calls and emails were involved in the process, but there were surely a lot of them. I remember many, many interesting discussions, like the one about linemen. And the lights will never go out. The lineman never made it to the book, but still the discussion was very interesting and heated. And then I remember Helen's breakthrough with the back-to-school festivities for Ukrainian term linijka, which does not exist in English, in the grandma poem. And also our work on almost neologisms in Trisagion, and all these efforts to reflect surjik in translation. Surjik is a blend of Ukrainian and Russian that is often used in informal speech, mostly in central, eastern, and southern Ukraine. And well, many beautiful findings in the process, and a lot of things that are obvious to Ukrainians because of the context, and just naturally need to be deciphered, explained for the audience abroad. And we went probably through every single detail. It was also important to add footnotes explaining names and places in very Ukrainian terms, and such an important name as Vassilstus, among other, which was mentioned in one of the poems we read. Another interesting thing, the book that we refer to most, myself, when I speak about myself, it's definitely a Bible. And in this poetry, Artur, as a believer, re-evaluates his relationship with God and finds a new take on different parts of the scripture. And you will hear these poems later on. But enough on my side. I will pass the mic farther, and
Thank you.
to my colleagues in Exeter.
Thank you, Yuliya, and thank you for resurrecting the lineman that I'm still attached to, but one of these days I'll let go. I was glad that you mentioned the voices that Artur shares. The second part of We Were Here is called, the longest part is called Voices, in fact. And the poem we heard, Partisan Street, written in that mixture of Ukrainian with bits of Russian in it, is in that dialect. Obviously, that's not straightforward to translate. In my own mind, in my own imagination, I hear that poem in a where I'm from Surrey originally, but basically South London. So that's how I hear it. But I suppose he was trying to make it almost like a Scouse or a Geordie or something like that. My colleague Helen came out with a brilliant solution for swings roundabout the lot, which is exactly what somebody would say. On a different take, when it comes to the Bible, you'll hear the final poem from We Were Here at the end of this presentation, first letter to the Corinthians. In that, we didn't exclusively rely on the King James Version of the Bible, but we did refer to it precisely because that has all the weight of centuries of the English language coming through that I thought was important to draw on. Yuliya mentioned footnoting. I'm not a professional translator myself, although I teach it. But footnoting in scholarly editing is something that I'm familiar with, but I never really expected to apply those kind of skills, if you will, research skills of editing very obscure early 17th century French text to something that's so important and relevant as We Were Here. Before I pass on to Fiona, I wanted to reveal a little bit, sneak behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain. I found an early version, or an earlier version, a pre-Fiona version, shall we say, a pre-Fiona and Charlotte version, Charlotte Shevchenko Knight, that is, another wonderful poet who worked on this collection of a poem. It's the last poem of the first part of We Were Here, The Field of Mars, which is the cemetery in Lviv. And there's a late draft of this goes as follows: lullaby. I'll go to bed and turn to the wall. Please return my mum and dad and my grandma. I'll go to bed. The fish will drift off in Dniester. May my sister and I fall asleep soon. The fish goes to sleep in the muddy water. May those people never come to our house again. The fish dreams of warm waters of the stream. Just like me, the fish sees her loved ones in a dream. Please return our mum and dad and grandma to my sister Kiryukha and me in a dream. And that version, which I say is a late draft, became this in the published version. I go to bed and turn to face the wall. Please send mum and dad and grandma back. I'll go to bed. Little fish will drift to sleep in Dniester. Let my sister and me fall soon to sleep. Little fish goes to sleep in the muddy water. Don't let those people come to our house again. Little fish dreams of warm currents in the stream. Just like me, little fish visits her loved ones in a dream. Please send our mum and dad and grandma back to my sister Kiryukha and me in a dream.
I feel I'm not a translator, so I feel a bit of a fraud right now. Charlotte Shevchenko Knight and I were kind of brought in at the last moment to kind of tinker, I think. So there's this lovely story, I don't know if you know it, it's about the composer Arvo Part, who stopped writing for a long time, stopped composing music for 7 years. And one day he ran out and he found this street sweeper and he said, "What should a composer do?" And the street sweeper allegedly said he should love every note. And I think for poets, when we're workshopping, that's what we're doing. We're loving every word and making sure that every word is the right word, which is very simple. So I think that's what Charlotte and I were trying to do. We were trying to tune in to make sure that the images were coming across clearly, to make sure that the language was singing. Also, I think there's something about the writer's mood in the poems that we were trying to tune into. So the famous Linesman poem has a kind of exuberance of imagery. You know, you want all the lights in the region to be shining in this house. And kind of tuning into that exuberance really helped us find the proper words for that, I think. and also just register. Artur is brilliant in his register, and just kind of meeting that in the English, trying to find the equivalent in the English is something that Charlotte and I were trying to help with. It was an amazing privilege for both of us to be involved in this book, and we were so grateful for the opportunity and loved it, loved the work, and loved speaking and laughing with Yuliya and chucking out Hugh's linemen as soon as we possibly could.
Okay, so now we would like to hear from the author, the most important person tonight.
The first thing the author want to say is to make a compliment to Hugh for his reading of The Partisan Street. When we had a smaller Zoom, our previous call, Hugh said that in his head, Heroes of Partisan Street sounds in his voice. And I want to tell you, Hugh, that from now on, it is also in my head. And as I told at the beginning, it was very important for me not to write a book about war and not to write a book about only myself. It was very important to find another voices, to put in this book someone else. And not just, for example, military guys, my comrades, not just soldiers, but, for example, we can read in this book poems in the name of mother, as Yulia told already, or in the name of grandmother, or children, or about children, or this beautiful example with Hugh's favorite poem, as we all already know, Partisan Street. It's about people I met near front line in the last occupied Ukrainian village before the front line. Next village were already occupied by Russians. So it's people who lives on the front line, who every morning wakes up because of shellings, because of Russian strikes. And it was very amazing to meet these people. These heroes, this Valya, who are talking in the Partisan Street. She was our neighbor, and you know, it's a people who don't have some basic living conditions, don't have electricity in their home, but they have a very great, very big hope, very big sense of hope, and sense of belonging to their homes, to their village, to their land, to their street. So it was very important to put many voices, and we will read a few poems for you, and you will hear a poem called Kiryukha, about a little boy who lived in that village and who also lived on Partisan Street. You heard at the beginning of that poem that this woman were saying something about Kiryukha, this boy with a difficult for you name. It's a 9-year-old boy who were between 3rd and 4th grade, because he ended the 3rd grade and then Russians came into his village. And it was the youngest comrade on Partisan Street, our little brother, with whom we spent many days. Now he lives, as we think, in Lviv, because his family Because his family evacuated him in 2023 when we were still in Zarichne, that village. So he is safe, and now he is 11 years old. But I have a poem when he is 9 years old, when he is our comrade, when we all are waiting for Saint Nicholas. And I will read this poem in Ukrainian, and Yulia will read it to you in English. Кирюха, не казатимеш, були тут. Тулились один до одного у відбитих руських бліндажах, а сніг вже був потім. Ми були тут, але нас ніколи про це не спитають. І тільки Кирюха, наш син полка, як вона говорила, наше єдине дитя на всю вулицю. Пригадає колись надломлені снікерси і мороз страшного воєнного грудня. Готуйся, питатимуть інше, готуйся. Де твоя нога? Де твої радісні друзі? Де твоя молодість, стара 20-річна людина, якій досі сняться смерть і надломлені снікерси? Її не спитають лише головного. Де ти був, коли Миколай страшного воєнного грудня поклав біля ліжка Кирюхи кульок з чудомаркету? А там були наші снікерси і мандарини. З кісточками, але солодкі.
Kiryukha, you won't say we were here, pressing against each other in dugouts won back from the Russians. And only later, snow came. We were here, but we'll never be asked about it. Only Kiryukha, our regiment's adopted child, like she said, the only one left in the entire street, will someday remember the crushed Snickers bars and the freezing cold of the terrible wartime December. Brace yourself. They'll ask you about other things, so brace yourself. Where's your leg? Where are your laughing friends? Where's your youth? You, an old man of 20, still dreaming of death and crushed Snickers bars. They won't ask you the most important thing. Where were you when Santa, in that terrible wartime December, left a plastic supermarket bag by Kiryukha's bed? A bag with our crushed Snickers bars and tangerines, the ones with seeds, but oh so sweet.
Діти, коли ми говоримо про надію, то насправді ми говоримо про дітей. Я вдячний, бо пам'ять про тебе досі вилазить зсередини, хоч стільки часу минуло. І колись усі діти будуть жмуритися від сонця. А ті з нас, хто виживе, побачать, що все це було недарма. Ми тут рідко говоримо про надію, чи про патріотизм, чи про батьківщину, але якщо говоримо, то це завжди про дітей. І знаєш, коли я думаю тепер про тебе, то уявляю, якою дитиною ти була, як ти жмурилася від сонця. Ті з нас, хто виживе, будуть довго мовчати. Бо навіщо слова про надію, коли ось вона, поруч, стоїть в замурзаних шортах, чухає руки, обкусані комарами, показує сонцю молочні зуби.
Children. When we speak of hope, we're actually speaking of children. I'm grateful for the memory of you, which still passes through me, though it was all so long ago. And someday all children will squint at the sun. And those of us who survived will see that none of this was in vain. Here we rarely speak of hope or patriotism or the motherland. But when we speak, it is always about children. And when I remember you, I imagine the child you were, squinting at the sun. Those of us who survive will be silent for a long time. Because who needs words about hope when it's standing right in front of you, wearing muddy shorts, scratching the mosquito bites on its arms, flashing its milk teeth at the sun.
We have another poem. So Artur will start, and then we'll pass the mic to Fiona for the English translation.
Молитва. З плаваючими плавай, з подорожуючими подорожуй, як говорять у церквах, з тією, яку зґвалтували, і яка носить дитину, дихай, 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 і з тим, який посивів, збирай рюкзак до школи. З обмороженими обморожуйся, і з контуженими блюй в окопі, і з командиром танка, якого шукають ще з жовтня, знайдися, складися з розкиданих частин, частичок, як говорять у церквах. А ще з тим, який їсть мівіну на холодній воді, з тим, який в полоні і ніколи не розкаже, з тим, якого встигли зачати, але не встигли народити, і з тією, яка не встигла. А ще з тими двома дівчатками, десь у Рівненській області, пам'ятаєш? Ми тільки їхали колоною на схід, а вони дивилися біля дороги і поклали руки на серця. І я тоді все зрозумів.
Prayer. With the swimmers swim, with the travellers travel, as they say in church. With the one who was raped and is expecting a child, breathe, breathe, breathe. With the child whose hair has gone grey, prepare a backpack for school. With the frostbitten, freeze. With the shell-shocked, vomit in the trench. With the tank commander who's been missing since October, be found. Be pieced together from scattered body parts. Consecrated particles, as they say in church. And also be with the one who eats pot noodles with cold water. With the one who was captured but will never talk. With the one who was conceived but didn't get born. And be with the one who didn't get to give birth. And also be with the two girls, somewhere in the Rivne region. Do you remember? We were driving to the east in a convoy, and they stood watching at the roadside and put their hands on their hearts. And then I understood everything.
So I want to say a few words now about some of the readers' responses that we've already started receiving for Yuliya's wonderful translation of We Were Here. I'd like to start with I suppose, well, for you it's going to be anonymous feedback. I know who it was. But somebody just, a couple of days ago, somebody wrote to me through Instagram thanks to you, Artur, I'm now trending on Instagram, actually. She wrote saying that she did a double take when she read about the Snickers bars that we just heard about that were given to Kiryukha for Christmas. They were smashed up, but like the tangerines, they were so sweet. She's one of those generous people who prepares, no one knows about this, but they prepare care packages for members of the Ukrainian armed forces. And she knows how popular Snickers bars are in Ukraine. But they can't, apparently it's hard for you to get hold of the good stuff we have here. I didn't know about this. We've got protein Snickers, yeah, healthy Snickers. So she said, well, maybe, who knows, maybe this is a coincidence. Maybe my care package somehow made it to the front line, to the regiment, and then to this 9-year-old boy. Who knows? But it was, I thought that was a very beautiful, almost a metaphor for what your book does, Artur, that we were here, and there the we, thanks to Yuliya's translation, is now expanding to people in the UK and beyond. The book's recently out in the US as well. Also, I thought very appropriate that that's coming as other responses are coming, not from academics or professional translators or reviewers, although we fortunately do have very great supporters who I'll mention in a moment, but from somebody who's very much of the kind of collective we of your title. And so I'm going to conclude this very brief section with one such reader. Coincidentally, today, the writer, Julian Evans, is giving a presentation on his book, Undefeatable, Death in Love and War, which is his book about Odessa, which is a city he knows and loves. That clash was unavoidable, but I'd like to pay tribute to Julian Evans as the first person professionally to support Yuliya's translation of We Were Here. He featured it in the Telegraph culture newsletter, and some of you may know the Telegraph has been extremely strong in its reporting about and from Ukraine. And he chose Children, which is the poem we heard, as Poem of the Week that went out to readers, the Telegraph culture newsletter. He says, I've been reading poetry by Ukrainian language poets since my first visit to the country more than 25 years ago. It is strikingly often a poetry of resistance against oppression. So many of Ukraine's poets were executed or died, like the great Vassallo, in the Soviet Union's Gulag labor camps. But in Children, one of the loveliest poems in We Were Here, his first collection translated into English, Dron instead dons the armor of hope. By personifying it as a child in muddy shorts, scratching mosquito bites on its arms, he summarizes the moment at which words like patriotism and survival are transformed into a small human being, flashing its milk teeth at the sun. For him, it's the children who will remind survivors that their fight was not in vain. And as Artur mentioned, the proceeds of his collection in Ukrainian and royalties from the translation go to his chosen charity, which is the Voices of Children charity in Ukraine. We also have wonderful support from another friend of the project and a great translator of Ukrainian himself, associate professor at University College London, Ewan Blacker, who also happens now to live in South London. It's on the side. He wrote a dual review with another wonderful book of Ukrainian wartime poetry, actually written in English by Oksana Maximchuk, Still City. And Oksana, thanks to Yuliya's connection, came to visit us in Exeter and gave a wonderful reading. It was beautiful to see them both being reviewed by Ewan in the TLS together. And he refers to both as taking their place in a poetic renaissance in wartime Ukraine, and part of the same ecosystem with the same goal, survival. He says, Artur Dron at 23, one of Ukraine's youngest war poets and a soldier himself, is direct about poetry's limits. A poem won't shield you from a bullet, he writes, here in Yuliya Musakovska's crystalline translation. We Were Here reflects on frontline service and on the ties and tensions with those at home. The opening poem encapsulates this message. This love, which cuts like a dull knife, this bitter love, which becomes your own, depends on those on the line and those behind it. Yet those on the line are not heroes. Their vulnerability is always just under the surface. In the village, a local woman called out to her child, "My son," and every one of us turned around. It is this openness about the inner emotional life of a frontline soldier that has won Dron, who was himself recently wounded in a Russian drone attack, a large following among Ukrainian readers. So very, very grateful to Ewan for that review in TLS. But I wanted to conclude this short section with a reader's review. We Were Here was chosen for a book club, I think in Kent. And I was very touched to read it. It came out recently, on 28th of March, by somebody called Amanda Turner. She writes, "I was there, right with Artur, right back into long forgotten memories. As the daughter of a British Army officer, I remembered I was a small child then when he was sent into the unknown, hot on the heels of the Second World War and the Suez Crisis, both of which he was involved in, came the little acknowledged conflict in Borneo and Brunei." I think one of the things, just as an aside, one of the things about We Were Here is I think it speaks very directly, I mean, obviously to any country that's experienced war, even if it's in quite a distant memory, as I think is the case in the UK, most people in the UK. I happened to meet on Friday General Sir Patrick Sanders, who's recently stood down as Chief of Staff, head of the British Armed Forces. He opened, I gave him a copy of We Were Here, he opened it to Kiryukha, actually, and he wanted you to know, Artur, how much he admired the poem. But he immediately said, yes, when I was commander in Afghanistan, my men wrote very moving poetry. So this is something that's part of who we are too. She says, the piece that we're about to hear, the first letter to the Corinthians is a pastiche of 1 Corinthians verse 13, 4 onwards, completely heartbreaking. It's a passage that many Christians can quote without pausing for thought, but this poem has made me look again and reinterpret the original quote. It encouraged me to test and examine the strength of my own faith and how I see love reflected around me. It's a must for every reader. Please don't skip it. In my own mind, I'll always think of it as Artur's first letter to the free world, reminding us that, but for the grace of whatever God you believe in, it could be us. You might have guessed that it's my favorite of all the pieces, and there are many that I love. I shall revisit it frequently. I feel so privileged to have been asked to review this book. It is one that would have slipped under the radar, and I would be all the poorer for that. At the end of the book, Dron poses the question, why do we need poetry in a time of war? Many would say we don't, but I disagree. He then gives us several reasons why we do, and I would add that voices always need to be heard. However, during a war, they need to be heard more often and even more loudly. When reading We Were Here, I was reminded of previous war poets I had read, such as Wilfred Owen, Rupert Brooks, and Robert Graves. The voice of a love that can conquer all needs to be shouted. Dron shouts well.
Okay, our time is running out, so we're on this final note before we open for questions. And of course, a presentation of a poetry book should end with a poem. And this time, I'd like the author's voice to make this final note. And I will start by reading this poem in English translation.
Progress.
The first letter to the Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. Love fears with a primal fear, but walks on. Love could have surrendered, abandoned everything, but it walks on. And sometimes love gets shot in the legs, or shell fragments get stuck in them, or its legs get blown off. Then love is carried by its friends. Love digs trenches and lives in them, gnawing on ice from a hacked-up plastic bottle when it suffers thirst at -20. Love goes out on combat duty, enters firing positions with hernias, fever, prostatitis, with blast concussions, asthma, and allergies, with a high probability of not making it back, thinking all the while about the one most important to them. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love distinguishes the sounds of a grad rocket launching, mines exploding, and tanks advancing. Love's eyes ache when it stares through a thermal imager too long. Love wakes up at night when mice in the dugout crawl under its coat. Sometimes love vomits at length in the woodland after a heavy fight. And sometimes love closes its friends' eyes, wraps them in sleeping bags, and carries them away. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Because sometimes when the shelling ceases, friends close love's eyes, wrap it in sleeping bags, and carry it away. And then it passes on to the living.
Перше до Коринтян. Любов довготерпить, любов милосердствує, не заздрить, любов не величається. Любов боїться тваринним страхом, але продовжує йти. Любов могла би здатися, залишити все, але продовжує йти. А інколи в любові прострелені ноги, або в ногах у любові осколки, і ноги її стискають турнікети, або ніг у любові більше немає. Тоді любов несуть її друзі. Любов риє окопи і живе в них, і гризе в них лід із розрізаної пляшки, коли хоче пити у -20. Любов виходить на бойові чергування, піднімається на позиції з грижами, з температурами, з простатитами, з контузіями, з астмами і алергіями, з високою ймовірністю не повернутися, з думками про когось найважливішого. Все зносить, вірить у все, сподівається всього, все терпить. Любов розрізняє на слух виходи градів, прильоти мін і рух танків. Очі любові болять, коли довго дивиться в тепловізор. Прокидається любов уночі, коли миші в бліндажі заповзають під її бушлат. Інколи любов довго блює в посадці після важкого бою, а інколи любов закриває очі друзям своїм і загортає їх в спальники і виносить. Ніколи любов не перестає. Хоч пророцтва існують та припиняться, хоч мови існують, замовкнуть, хоч існує знання та скасується. Бо інколи закінчується обстріл, і любові закривають очі, і друзі загортають її в спальники, і виносять, і тоді вона переходить живим.
And now we will open for questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. We have about 10 minutes to take questions. And we'll start with the room here in Lviv. I'll ask if you have any questions to Artur, most of all. Well, it looks like we have a very close-knit community here in Lviv, and they will ask questions in private later if they want to. So we will go to our room in Exeter and ask if any of you have questions to Artur, please.
Oh, we've got lots of questions here, but I'd just like to say also, if people are online, they can start sending in their questions by through the chat. But sorry, hands up again, please. May I start with you, Charles?
I wonder if you, hello, Julia Crockett. I wonder if you paint or draw also.
Well, I used to paint when I was a child, I think till my 5th or 6th grade, but not now, unfortunately, or maybe not yet.
I like not yes is good.
Yeah. Maybe it's better here because they have problems with some. First, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Artur and Yuliya. And I am mindful of words of Professor Roberts you heard, that he said that he would place Ukrainian war poetry alongside British First World War poetry for English speaking. And actually, I often think about the First World War and have a lot of association for various reasons. And what I noticed, I do not know if my English friends will agree with this. What I have noticed, having reading a lot of British First World War poetry, and actually it will determine my question I'm going to address to Artur and Yuliya. So, for example, a belief that war offered purpose and moral clarity was a common sentiment among poets early in the war. What have I done for you in my England? What is there I would not do England, my England? The horrors of war were constantly reflected, but the tone of the early British war poems was idealistic, solemn, reverent, and exhortative. And actually, in a nutshell, it's a kind of patriotic fervor, so intense enthusiasm. And later poems were more about comrades. The poems of Ukrainian war poets were from the very beginning about people. In Artur Dron's We Were Here, there are names everywhere. Romko, Valya, Misha. So my question to Artur. You continue to write poetry. Have the accents in your poems changed? And a similar question to Yuliya, who writes poetry and translates poems by Ukrainian poets. Have the accent shifted in the third, fourth year of the war?
Thank you a lot for a question. I think the main accents doesn't change. The main thing is still to tell something about someone. For me, one of the best opportunity I can take from poetry, from literature in general, is to tell about someone. It's a great privilege to can tell about someone. And you, as examples, told about poems Misha, Roman, Valya. I can say that I have already new poems called Sasha, Vova, etc. So I think in my next poetry collection, we will see this line continue.
Thank you. Thank you. Yulia, and have you noticed something like this? Any shift in the third, fourth year of the war?
I think that the Ukrainian wartime poetry still remains human-centric most of all. And I think that now we, compared to the first and maybe the second year, when we were writing so much for the external audience, appealing to the external audience, now we are more talking to each other in our poetry. I have noticed this trend because in a way, we understand that we were here, and we are here still, and the war still goes on, and it is Ukraine's war for survival, and nobody else is joining this battle, no matter how big and how evil the enemy is. So we're supposed to walk this road along, and the most important for us is to preserve the unity of our people and give each other strength. So that is where this strength comes from.
Thank you.
Yes.
In Ukrainian and in English language. Артур, хочу вам подякувати за вашу творчість, за вашу поезію. Завдяки вам я відкрила свої творчі здібності писати вірші, тому дякую з цього серця. And I'm very grateful for Artur poetry and for our poetry evenings that Devon Ukrainian Association made for Ukrainian people. Thank you for Hugh and Fiona for your active exercises that made me to write some poems. And I feel so grateful that my poetry touched the hearts English people and Ukrainian people. So дякую вам щиро за вашу творчість, за вашу креативність, за те, що ви пишете і про дітей, в тому числі, як про Надію. Мене, як маму, це дуже торкається серцем. Тому від усієї душі дякую за ваші старання і в поезії, і на війні. Дякую.
Дякую вам за теплі слова, дякую за те, що прийшли. Хай вам добре, продуктивно пишеться, а дітям передавайте від нас всіх привіт.
Дякуємо. And we really need to wrap up. So I want to thank everyone who spoke today, who listened to us today. And I really hope this hybrid virtual conversation turns at some point into a real life meeting of all the people involved in this wonderful book project. So please read Artur's book if you haven't done it yet, and recommend it to your friends and other people. And again, thank you to everyone who was with us tonight.
Thank you all. Thank you for this interesting experience with such kind of presentations. And of course, the biggest thankfulness is to this wonderful team who were working on a book. So thank you, Hugh, thank you, Fiona, thank you all for your presence.
I think Yakuram may be right. All the credit goes to you, Artur, for everything. Thank you so much for sharing your poetry with us. I think I speak for everybody in this room for that. Thank you, Yuliya. Thank you to Maria, who's been in the background organizing things in the House of Sound in Lviv. Have a wonderful evening in Lviv. We're going off, I hope, to have pizza and drinks, and there are copies of We Were Here for sale as well in Exeter. So I guess it only remains for you to say papa. Papa. That means bye.
До побачення. Гарного вечора.
Thank you.